Hey guys, tonight we drift into the torchlit haze of an ancient Egyptian night market, the kind of place where the Nile whispers nearby and smoke from oil lamps curls lazily into the sky. The air is thick with spices, roasted grain, and laughter, a mix of laborers relaxing after work and traders hustling for a few more copper pieces before packing up their baskets. You wander in, half curious and half drowsy, guided more by the smells than by the flickering light. One stall offers a mound of bread that still steams faintly. Another has skewers of fish sizzling over clay braziers. And somewhere in the crowd you catch the sharp, sweet tang of honey, warming in a pan. You probably won't survive this menu if you're gluten-free, but the ancients sure didn't worry about carbs. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I'm always curious to see this sleepy little community mapped out across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ground crunches under your sandals as you weave into the bazaar. Most Egyptians rise with the sun and end their day early, but this market is alive with after-hours trade. Mainstream fact, the Nile's fertile banks made grain so abundant that bread and beer dominated the diet for every social class. It was fuel, comfort, and currency rolled into one. In these night stalls, you see just how versatile bread can be. Soaked in honey, fried in oil, even shaped into little animal figures for children. A quirky tidbit, some loaves excavated from tombs are so carbonized that they look more like black bricks than food. Archaeologists joke they could be used as paperweights rather than snacks. Imagine leaving behind your eternal offering only for someone thousands of years later to pick it up and mutter, "Well, that's one way to break a tooth." You pass a brewer's booth where clay jars line up neatly, frothy beer sloshing as buyers dip cups straight in. The drink is thick, more like porridge than the crisp lagers you know today. Still, it's refreshing in the heat and packed with calories, ancient Egyptian fast fuel. Historians still argue whether it was safer to drink than water, or just more fun. Maybe both. Either way, you take a sip and feel the grain-heavy tang coat your tongue. Vendors shout in sing-song voices, beckoning customers with promises of sweetness and spice. Someone hawks roasted chickpeas, another waves strips of dried fish tied neatly with palm fiber. Kids dart between the legs of adults, chasing after crumbs dropped in the dust. Above it all, the moon hangs pale over the river, watching like it has for thousands of years, as humans find excuses to snack long past dinner time. You pause near a stall where figs are piled high, their sticky flesh glistening under the lamplight. The seller dips one in honey, presses it into a cake of crushed tiger nuts, and offers it to you. The bite is dense, chewy, and unexpectedly rich, ancient junk food at its finest. The crowd around you hums with satisfaction, each person clutching something fried, baked, or brewed. And so the market flows around you, lively yet oddly soothing, as if the Nile itself insists that food and fellowship belong together, even at the end of a long day. You walk deeper still, the flicker of flames drawing you onward, promising more tastes, more stories, more glimpses into the timeless cravings of a civilization that refused to settle for plain porridge when honey and spice were within reach. You move further into the market, and the smell of warm grain follows you like a loyal shadow. Everywhere you turn, there's bread, flat loaves stacked in baskets, conical rolls cooling on mats, and even small dumpling-shaped bites that look suspiciously like the kind of snack someone might sneak into their bag for later. Bread isn't just food here, it's practically oxygen. Mainstream fact, ancient Egyptians relied on emmer wheat and barley to produce bread. The loaves were often dense, dark, and filled with husk fragments that wore down teeth over time. Archaeologists studying mummies find jawlines ground almost smooth from years of chewing. If modern dentists had a time machine, this would be their nightmare holiday destination. You watch a woman grind grain on a cornstone, her movements slow and practiced, dust rising in the lamplight. The rhythmic scrape fills the space like background music. Nearby, a man stirs a vat of fermenting mash, froth bubbling up as the smell of sour beer wafts through the air. This isn't wine country, this is beer territory, and every class drinks it daily. A quirky tidbit, records suggest workers on royal building projects were sometimes paid in beer rations, about 4 liters a day. Imagine clocking in at your job and your boss handing you a keg instead of a paycheck. Historians still argue whether this practice made workers more loyal or just more sluggish, but it's safe to say morale was probably, well, foamy. You sit with a group of laborers crouched near a small fire. They tear chunks of bread, dunk them into bowls of beer, and chew thoughtfully. The mix turns into a slurry that's surprisingly filling, like ancient cereal gone rogue. One man grins at you and says something in rapid-fire Egyptian. You don't catch the words, but the raised loaf in his hand is clear enough. Eat, drink, and stop looking so confused. The bread here isn't uniform. Some loaves are spiced with coriander or sweetened with dates, others shaped in molds that leave decorative patterns. You even spot bread baked into animal forms, little hedgehogs and crocodiles, perhaps meant for children or offerings. It's food, but also charm, entertainment, even prayer. Historians still argue whether bread making was mostly done at home or in communal bakeries. Evidence suggests both. Households produced their own daily loaves, but large state bakeries churned out mass quantities for temples and workers' villages. Tonight, though, it feels very personal. One family grinding, another baking, a third selling hot rolls to hungry passers-by. You chew a small piece yourself, the texture rougher than you expect, the taste nutty and sour. It fills you instantly, the kind of food designed less for pleasure and more for endurance. Yet when paired with that thick beer, it becomes strangely addictive, like peanut butter and jelly, but ancient and gritty. Around you, the market buzzes with chatter. A boy runs by carrying a bundle of loaves tied with reed twine. A brewer's apprentice sloshes beer into clay mugs, spilling half on his sandals. Somewhere in the distance, a musician plucks a lute, his tune mingling with the scrape of grinding stones and the hiss of open fires. And through it all, bread and beer remain the stars, humble yet unshakable, the beating heart of this entire civilization. They're the ancient equivalent of fast food combos. Affordable, accessible, and always ready when hunger strikes. As the night deepens, you realize the market is less about extravagance and more about routine comforts, the simple joys that keep people tethered to life. And here, with a crust of bread in your hand and the sour tang of beer on your lips, you feel yourself settling into their rhythm too, steady and timeless, nourished by the same staples that built pyramids and filled tombs alike. The market doesn't stay still for long. You notice that much of its life isn't even fixed on the dusty ground. The Nile itself is a moving artery of trade, and its ferries and little reed boats serve as floating snack carts. You follow the sound of sloshing water and step onto a rickety wooden dock, where a ferryman balances baskets of food almost as carefully as he does passengers. Mainstream fact, the river was the main highway of ancient Egypt, carrying not just granite and papyrus, but also quick meals and treats. Vendors often paddled across with baskets of bread, jars of beer, or dried fish, selling to travelers who didn't want to wait until they reached a town. It's the ancient version of a drive-thru, except slower and slightly wetter. You climb into a ferry where passengers huddle close, each holding some portable bite. A woman passes you a flat round of bread, already stuffed with onions and herbs, a proto-sandwich that drips faintly onto your lap. The taste is sharp, salty, and filling, perfect fuel for a river crossing. A quirky tidbit, inscriptions show vendors shouting catchy phrases to hawk their goods. Imagine walking past someone yelling, "Hot bread straight from the oven, don't let your neighbor get the last loaf," or "Beer smoother than the Nile flood, one sip and you'll thank Osiris." You can almost hear the chorus now, their voices bouncing across water and stone. Historians still argue whether these vendor cries were exaggerated ritual formulas or just everyday marketing tactics, but the rhythm of the calls suggests a performance as much as a transaction. The ferryman himself doubles as a salesman. Between rowing strokes, he points out a small jar at his feet, pickled radishes bobbing in brine. He winks and mutters that they cure seasickness, though given the bobbing boat, you're not sure whether to believe him. You bite one anyway. It's sharp enough to jolt you awake, the ancient cousin of a sour candy. As the boat glides through the moonlit current, you glance at others eating quietly. One man scoops lentil stew with a broken bit of bread, careful not to spill. A child nibbles dried figs, sticky hands leaving smears across his cheeks. Even the ferryman finally grabs a mouthful between strokes, proving that hunger doesn't wait for shore. Historians still argue whether these river snacks were bought daily by locals, or if they were more of a traveler's treat, reserved for those constantly in motion. The evidence doesn't agree, but watching the easy trade across the water tonight, you get the sense that the Nile carried not just stone and taxes, but also laughter, crumbs, and the occasional onion-stuffed loaf. The crossing doesn't take long, but the memory lingers, the sounds of vendor cries echoing behind you, the taste of sharp radish still buzzing on your tongue. You step off the ferry onto the opposite bank, your stomach full and your curiosity even fuller, ready to follow the smells deeper into the glowing, chaotic veins of the night market. The further you wander, the more you notice something curious. The market hums with sweetness, even though sugarcane hasn't made its debut here yet. Instead, the Egyptians lean on their own toolbox of natural sweeteners, and it's enough to give you a sticky-fingered tour through their version of Candyland. Mainstream fact, honey was the prized sweetener of the Nile Valley, gathered from hives kept in clay cylinders and often reserved for the wealthy or temple offerings. But here in the night market, you see it drizzled over bread or stirred into beer, transforming ordinary staples into indulgences. The stall in front of you has honey jars lined up like glowing amber gems, their golden sheen catching the lamplight. A vendor grins and offers you a date dipped in honey, pressed together with chopped almonds. You bite down and the sweetness floods your mouth, dense, chewy, almost too much. You wonder if ancient dentists just gave up on their patient's molars entirely. A quirky tidbit, the Egyptians also used tiger nuts, small sweet tubers, to make confections. Pounded into a paste, mixed with honey and rolled into balls, they were essentially energy truffles long before chocolate was even a rumor. Archaeologists have even found recipes for them scratched onto papyrus. Imagine raiding your ancestors' cookbook only to find snack hacks scrawled between medical spells and laundry tips. Historians still argue whether tiger nut sweets were everyday fare for commoners or more of a festival treat, but clearly someone had a sweet tooth strong enough to warrant writing it down. Nearby, another vendor presses figs into dense cakes, layering them with sesame seeds for texture. They're sticky, portable, and perfect for travel. Ancient granola bars with none of the modern marketing. A child tugs at her mother's sleeve, pointing insistently until she gets one, and then she wanders off happily, her cheeks smeared with fig paste. Further along, you catch a whiff of something unusual. Roots being boiled in a clay pot. It turns out to be marshmallow root, which when cooked becomes sticky and sweet. Egyptians believed it soothed sore throats, but here, you watch someone swirl it with honey into a chewy lump that kids devour eagerly. Congratulations, you've just stumbled on the distant ancestor of marshmallows. Historians still argue whether these treats were mainly religious offerings or common indulgences. Many tomb paintings show trays of figs, honey cakes, and tiger nut sweets laid out for the afterlife, suggesting that even eternity required a snack stash. But here in the bustling market, you see them in the hands of workers, children, and traders alike, proving that the sweet tooth has always been universal. You take another bite of honey-drizzled fig, and feel your fingers stick together instantly. The crowd presses close, each person clutching some sweet concoction, laughing as the sugar rush, or rather honey rush, seeps in. The night seems brighter, the music sharper, the torches taller, And you realize that even without cane sugar or chocolate, the ancient Egyptians had already cracked the code for guilty pleasures that stick in your teeth and in your memory. The sugary stalls fade behind you, replaced by a very different soundtrack. The hiss and pop of oil meeting something wet. Your nose twitches before your eyes even catch it. Fried food, glorious and ancient, sizzling away in clay pans balanced over glowing embers. If there's one constant in human history, it's that someone, somewhere, figured out how to dunk dough in hot oil and make everybody else line up. Mainstream fact: fish from the Nile was a major protein source, eaten fresh, salted, or dried. Here at the market, though, vendors have taken it further, dropping thin fillets into bubbling oil until the skin curls golden and crisp. A young man flips a sizzling batch with a reed spatula, his grin wide as customers hover impatiently, waiting to snatch their share. You can almost hear the unspoken ancient slogan, "Hot fish, eat fast before the cat gets it." A quirky tidbit: fried fritters made from dough mixed with honey or dates also appear in ancient records, likely festival food. They puff in the oil like little balloons, then collapse into sticky sweet bites once cooled. One vendor shakes them in a clay bowl dusted with sesame seeds before handing them out. In palm leaf packets, you take one, nearly burn your fingers, and laugh as the hot honey oozes across your tongue. Forget deep fryers. This reed-fueled contraption works just fine. The stall next to it offers chickpea patties spiced with coriander and garlic. The smell alone pulls you in, earthy and rich, and you can't help but think of them as proto-falafel. Historians still argue whether this dish has roots in ancient Egypt, or if it drifted in later, but when you bite into one, crispy outside, soft inside, you stop caring who invented it. Good is good, and this is very good. A crowd clusters around a brazier where small eels fry until they curl like spirals of gold. The vendor tosses them onto flatbread with a squeeze of sour pomegranate juice, handing each portion off like it's treasure. People devour them standing, juices dripping down wrists, eyes half closed in bliss. The air in this corner of the market is thick with smoke, laughter, and the chorus of hissing pans. Every now and then, a vendor shouts warnings to keep hands back. Oil burns are universal across time, after all. Children dart between legs, clutching fritters, their cheeks shiny with honey. Historians still argue whether fried food was rare luxury or common indulgence. Oil wasn't cheap, yet evidence of widespread use suggests that, at least during festivals, everyone got a taste of crispy joy. Standing here, surrounded by the eager crowd, you feel it must have been worth every drop of precious oil. As the torches flicker higher and the frying continues, you notice how communal it all is. Strangers leaning shoulder to shoulder, swapping bites, laughing as they fan their burned tongues. It's food designed not just to fill, but to delight, a sensory spectacle as much as a snack. You lick honey from your fingers, savor the crunch of spiced chickpea, and realize something simple but eternal. Fried food has always been a cheat code for happiness. From this Nile-side market to your modern late-night cravings, the sizzle remains the same, binding centuries together in one hot, irresistible bite. You drift away from the frying stalls, wiping sticky honey from your hands, only to be pulled along by another scent. Warm, yeasty, almost malty. It wraps around you like a blanket, heavy and heady in the hot air. You follow it through the crowd until you find the culprits. Brewers and bakers side by side, their goods blurring into one another. Mainstream fact: beer was the drink of choice in ancient Egypt, not water, which could be unsafe. It wasn't the hoppy IPA you might be imagining, though. Instead, it was thick, cloudy, sometimes chewed rather than sipped, and brewed from partly baked barley bread crumbled into vats of water. You spot workers mashing loaves into clay jars, then stirring with long paddles, the froth foaming lazily at the top. A quirky tidbit: some brews were flavored with dates or honey, making them the ancient equivalent of fruity cocktails. One vendor ladles a sweet-smelling version into a jug. the liquid glowing amber in the torchlight. He winks as he hands it off, clearly proud of his sugary twist on the daily staple. You take a sip? Sweet, grainy, oddly filling. It's more like drinkable porridge than what you'd order at a bar, but after a few gulps you feel a pleasant fuzziness creep in. Ancient happy hour unlocked. The bakers next to them are pounding dough in wide troughs, shaping it into the conical molds that line their ovens. Round, flat loaves slide in and out, their edges charred and smoky. Some are plain, just flour and water, the bare minimum to keep workers going. Others are sprinkled with coriander seeds or brushed with honey for those who want a little luxury. Children wait with clay tokens, like ancient food stamps, to collect rations of bread, their hands barely able to hold the steaming loaves. One baker pulls out small triangular pastries stuffed with dates, a rare treat. The filling bubbles out, sticky and golden, making you think of a proto-Pop-Tart. You can't resist tearing one open, steam curling up against your face. Sweetness bursts across your tongue, and you understand instantly why scribes once complained about gaining weight at the palace bakeries. Nearby, large storage jars stand in neat rows, the equivalent of giant beer kegs. Workers seal them with mud caps, then scratch little reed marks across the surface to record which batch belongs to whom. Historians still argue whether beer was stronger than modern brews or closer to liquid bread, but everyone agrees it was central to daily life, wages, and even ritual offerings. You can imagine workers at the pyramids lined up, each with their ration of bread and beer, the eternal combo meal. The mood around these stalls is lively. A group of laborers joke loudly as they clink clay mugs, spilling foam on their tunics. One staggers a little too dramatically, earning a chorus of laughs. Children tear hunks of hot bread, blowing on the crust, while mothers dip loaves into beer to soften them for toddlers. It's not elegant dining, but it's communal, sustaining, and, judging by the cheers, fun. You notice too how closely bread and beer are tied together, two halves of the same coin. The loaves that don't make it into ovens become the base for brewing. Leftovers find new life, bubbles and yeast carrying them forward. It's a perfect cycle, born from necessity but celebrated as pleasure. The crowd grows thicker as the evening deepens. Someone sings a rough tune about beer loosening tongues, another about bread warming bellies. You laugh softly, realizing that while lyrics and recipes change, humans haven't. We still chase carbs and buzz in the same breath. Your head swims a little as you finish your date-sweetened beer. The smoky tang of bread, the yeasty cloud of fermentation, the laughter of tipsy workers, all of it leaves you comfortably drowsy, like you've joined not just a market, but a ritual older than memory. The market seems to hum louder as night deepens, lanterns flickering against stalls piled with things that blur the line between food and medicine. You wander toward a cluster of jars, baskets, and bunches of green tied together with twine. A woman with quick hands sorts through leaves, muttering under her breath as though each herb carries its own personality. Mainstream fact: ancient Egyptian cooking often relied on onions, garlic, and leeks not just for flavor, but also for health. Workers believed onions kept them strong, garlic was handed out to laborers as a kind of edible vitamin, and leeks were praised for their ability to soothe. You can almost feel the sharp bite in your nose as baskets of onions spill over in every direction. A quirky tidbit: coriander and fenugreek seeds were thought to aid digestion, but they were also slipped into bread dough for extra flavor. One vendor hands you a flat, round loaf speckled with seeds, fragrant and earthy. It tastes surprisingly familiar. Almost like something you'd pick up at a modern farmer's market, except here it comes wrapped in papyrus instead of brown paper. You pause at a tray lined with tiny figs stuffed with nuts and drizzled with honey. A vendor claims the snack opens the lungs and brightens the heart. You bite one, syrup sticking to your teeth, and while your lungs remain untested, your mood definitely brightens. Herbal teas steep in clay pots, their scents drifting together into an aromatic fog. Mint leaves bob in hot water, joined by chamomile-like blossoms that promise calm sleep. Historians still argue whether these herbal brews were considered daily beverages or more like medicinal treatments, but the effect is the same: soothing warmth running down your throat, easing the edges of the bustling market. Spices add their own chorus: cumin, dill, mustard seed, all tucked into little cones of woven reed. A boy runs up to you, waving a sprig of fresh marjoram under your nose, laughing at your sneeze. His mother scolds him lightly, then presses a cone of salt into your palm as if to say, "Flavor this, don't sniff it." You realize quickly that much of this junk food has less to do with empty calories and more to do with layering flavor onto the staples of bread and beer. A dash of cumin turns plain beans into comfort food. A sprinkle of fenugreek shifts an ordinary loaf into something nutty and rich. And of course, onions, sliced raw or charred black on coals, become the crowd pleaser you'd expect. A group of young men chew roasted garlic cloves like snacks, their breath potent enough to clear a temple. They laugh at each other's grimaces, daring one another to eat more. You think back to modern garlic festivals and realize again, some habits just refuse to die. Around the corner, a tiny stall offers something unusual: dried lotus seeds. The vendor insists they restore energy and shakes a handful into your palm. They crunch between your teeth, nutty and almost popcorn-like. Not bad, you think, though they'd be better with a little butter and a movie screen. As you chew, you overhear a healer arguing with a cook. One insists a certain herb is sacred, meant only for curing fevers. The other says it makes stew taste better. Historians still argue whether many of these plants were primarily culinary or medicinal, but here in the market they're both, seasoning and spell in a single bundle. The chatter around you feels less like shopping and more like a community pharmacy meets snack bar. Someone buys garlic for warding off spirits, someone else for making stew, and someone else simply because they like the crunch. Whatever the reason, the rhythm is the same. Herbs ground, seeds toasted, flavors passed hand to hand. You tuck your cone of salt into your pouch, savor the sweetness of figs, and sip a steaming cup of mint tea. For a moment, you feel wrapped not just in flavor but in care, as though every bite and sip comes with a whispered promise to heal, to comfort, to make the night a little lighter. Your pouch of salt bumps against your hip as you weave deeper into the glow of lanterns, where the air changes again. It's heavier here, thick with the scent of smoke, charred skin, and roasting fat. Your stomach rumbles in spite of the sweetness and herbs you've already sampled. This is the meat corner, where luxury and indulgence collide. Mainstream fact: meat in ancient Egypt wasn't part of daily meals for most people. It was expensive and usually reserved for festivals, temple offerings, or the wealthier classes. Still, on special occasions, markets like this brimmed with sizzling cuts. You spot racks of skewered goose turning over clay hearths, the fat dripping down into the fire, making the flames leap. A vendor turns them with practiced ease, the skin blistering golden and crackling with each rotation. A quirky tidbit: Nile farmers sometimes fatten geese or ducks by force-feeding them. A surprisingly early version of what you might recognize today as luxury foie gras. The idea feels both decadent and unsettling, yet the result here looks undeniably tempting. Plump birds with skin stretched shiny tight, stuffed with herbs and onions before roasting. Goat ribs hang from wooden racks, slowly smoked over acacia coals. The scent alone could hypnotize you, thick and earthy. A boy fans the embers, coughing dramatically but grinning at the coins he collects from impatient customers. You edge closer, tear a strip of meat from a bone handed to you, and taste smoky salt, the kind of primal flavor that makes you immediately forgive every cough of the boy's bellows. Another stall specializes in dried beef salted until it hardens like leather. Workers hack at it with bronze knives, passing slivers to buyers who chew slowly, like ancient jerky. It's chewy, salty, and keeps your jaw working overtime, but it also carries a deep savor that makes you understand why it traveled so well. The noise here is almost as intense as the scent. Butchers shout, blades clink, dogs bark at the edges, tails wagging furiously in hope of scraps. A child dangles a half-gnawed bone just out of reach of one mutt, laughing as the dog leaps. You shake your head, amused. Humans tormenting their pets with food clearly hasn't changed either. Historians still argue whether ordinary Egyptians had frequent access to poultry, or if it remained a privilege of the elite. Archaeological remains show goose and duck bones scattered in settlements, suggesting at least some regular indulgence, but the debate lingers. Standing here, watching even modestly dressed market-goers trade coins for a strip of goose skin, you suspect the truth sat somewhere in the middle. Rare, but treasured. A group of workers sit cross-legged near the hearth, sharing a flatbread piled with chopped meat, herbs, and pomegranate seeds. The juices run into the bread, softening it into something messy, but delicious. They laugh between bites, grease shining on their fingers, passing the makeshift platter around until nothing but crumbs remain. Near them, another vendor offers spiced meatballs skewered on reeds, sizzling as they drip fat onto coals. They smell so much like something from a modern street fair that you can't resist. The bite is juicy, bursting with garlic and cumin, and you sigh in satisfaction, knowing once again that the concept of street meat transcends millennia. You glance back at the geese turning slowly, their skin crisping into perfection. Someone pours a glaze of honey and coriander over the top, the sweetness caramelizing instantly. The crowd leans forward, drawn like moths. You realize this corner of the market isn't just about eating. It's theater. Vendors know how to dazzle, how to make mouths water from a distance. You lick your fingers, wipe them on your tunic, and take in the scene one more time. Firelight glints off bronze knives, dogs yip. The smell of smoke and fat thickens the air. It's a sensory storm, but one you give in to gladly. Tonight at least you eat like the pharaohs. You wander away from the smoky haze of roasting meat, your tunic carrying the scent of charred goose skin. The market doesn't get quieter, it just shifts tone. Here the stalls gleam in torchlight with clay bowls of candied fruits, sticky nuts, and glistening honey. If the meat stalls felt primal, this corner feels indulgent, like stepping into a sweet dream. Mainstream fact: honey was the main sweetener in ancient Egypt, often called the food of the gods. Beekeepers tended hives along the Nile, coaxing golden combs from clay cylinders. At the market, honey runs like molten gold from jars as wide as your arms, coating everything it touches: figs, dates, bread, even roasted nuts. A vendor dips a spoon, twirls the viscous ribbon high, and lets it drizzle over a pile of sesame seeds until they clump into shiny clusters. A quirky tidbit. Some records suggest Egyptians even used honey to preserve fruits and nuts, essentially creating the first energy bars. You bite into one sticky lump, a mix of dates, almonds, and honey compressed into a brick, and nearly pull out a tooth. Sweet, chewy filling, it's a perfect pocket snack for farmers or pyramid builders. Ancient granola bars, minus the clever branding. You watch a woman carefully candy lotus roots in a bubbling pan of honey syrup. The slices glisten like stained glass, brittle and translucent when cooled. She cracks one between her teeth with a grin, offering you another. The crunch echoes in your skull. The taste, somewhere between caramel and toasted marshmallow. A group of children crowd around a tray of figs stuffed with walnuts and rolled in honey. Their faces shine with sugar, hands sticky as they shove the sweets into their mouths. Their laughter turns the whole stall into a chaos of joy. The tired mother tries to wipe a child's chin, but gives up halfway, shaking her head with a smile. Historians still argue whether these honey-heavy treats were everyday indulgences or festival exclusives. Honey was precious, yet it appears in household records often enough to suggest it wasn't impossible for common folk. Maybe the fanciest candies were rare, but simple honey-sweetened fruits were a treat most could sneak when they had the chance. Nuts roasted in clay pans give off a warm, earthy smell, cracked open and tossed into bowls of honey syrup. One vendor crushes them into paste and spreads it between thin sheets of bread, proto-dessert sandwiches that look suspiciously like candy bars. You take a bite, nuts crunching, honey gluing everything together, and sigh as the sweetness floods your tongue. Beyond nuts and figs, you notice grapes drying in the heat on woven mats, raisins being packed into baskets. Dates, naturally sweet, don't even need honey. They're already sticky and luscious. A boy pops one into his mouth, then offers another to his donkey, who chomps it happily, ears flicking. Even the animals, it seems, crave dessert. As you chew, you can't help but imagine a scribe, hunched over papyrus, sneaking one of these honeyed clusters between lines of hieroglyphs, smudging ink with sugar. Humans, after all, have always had a weakness for snacks that leave our fingers sticky and our focus wandering. The longer you linger, the more hypnotic it feels. Amber honey dripping, figs gleaming, sesame crackling in hot pans. You think about modern candy aisles, neon wrappers promising sugar highs, and laugh softly. Here there's no plastic packaging, no artificial colors, just pure sweetness, delivered straight from bees and trees, and yet the joy feels exactly the same. With your pouch heavier and your teeth on the edge of aching, you step back from the stall. The night around you hums, your fingers still tacky, your mouth buzzing with sugar. You realize that for all our modern innovations, junk food has always thrived on one thing: sweetness you can't resist. Your teeth still hum from honey when another scent cuts through. Sharp, tangy, almost nose-tickling. You follow it toward a row of jars and amphories stacked neatly in shaded stalls. Here the fare is less about sugar and smoke, and more about things left to bubble, sour, and transform. Ferments, pickles, and tangy sauces that make the rest of the market sing. Mainstream fact: ancient Egyptians brewed not only beer, but also dabbled in fermented foods like pickled vegetables and preserved fish. Salt was precious yet indispensable, and vinegar, made from spoiled wine or sour beer, provided that sour kick. A vendor proudly lifts the lid off a jar of pickled radishes, the brine so strong it stings your nostrils. He spears one with a reed and pops it in his mouth, crunch echoing in the air, before grinning through the puckered tang. A quirky tidbit: some amphorae are filled with fish sauce. Yes, the ancestor of the pungent condiment beloved in Southeast Asia today. Tiny fish left to ferment under the sun, mashed into salty, liquid gold. The smell is so potent that you instinctively take a step back, but customers crowd around eagerly, dipping chunks of bread into it like the best dipping sauce on earth. You give in, tasting it against your better judgment, and though your eyes water, the savory punch clings to your tongue in the most addictive way. Clay bowls nearby hold cucumbers floating in brine, their skins wrinkled, softened into sour snacks. Another jar brims with preserved olives, tart and oily, bobbing like green gems. A woman packs them into small reed baskets for customers, her hands stained with salt brine, nails rimmed white. Historians still argue whether fermentation in Egypt was purely for preservation, or if people also prized the flavors it produced. Was the tang a happy accident, or a deliberate pursuit of taste? You chew another olive, sour and sharp, and decide flavor was too good to ignore. You notice how these tangy foods pair perfectly with the bread, beer, and meats you've already sampled. A salted cucumber tucked into warm bread balances the heaviness of roasted goose. A dab of fish sauce over beans transforms them from plain to electric. Junk food, you realize, doesn't always mean sweet. It can just as easily mean salty, funky, and addictive. Children laugh nearby, daring each other to sip tiny drops of brine. One pulls a face so exaggerated it makes you laugh too, even as his friends collapse into the sand, howling at his sour-tongued misery. The vendor shakes his head, muttering about wasted stock, but smiles all the same. Another amphora holds something more mysterious: fermented locust beans mashed into a dark paste. The vendor explains it's used as a seasoning, though the exact recipe is his family's secret. You spread a smear onto bread and taste earthy bitterness cut with savory depth. Strange, but oddly satisfying. The night air here feels thicker, damp with vinegar steam and salt brine, but also oddly refreshing. You think of modern pickles on burgers, hot sauce on fries, or soy sauce drizzled on rice. Suddenly, the idea that Egypt might have had its own proto-condiments feels less like trivia and more like continuity. Humans crave that zing, that salty punch, that little jolt of wow to cut through blandness. You leave the stall with a belly full of sour and salty tangs, realizing your palate has traveled from sweet to savory, from crispy to chewy, and now into the briny depths of ancient umami. Your pouch clinks with a tiny jar of olives gifted by the vendor, and you walk on, crunching another pickle, grinning as the sour hits just right. The briny sting still lingers on your tongue when the market shifts once again, this time into a hum of music and laughter. Ahead, torches light up wide mats spread on the ground where entertainers balance trays piled with festival foods. The air is loud with clapping, singing, and the rhythmic thump of drums. Here, food isn't just fuel or indulgence, it's celebration, meant to be shared in moments of joy. Mainstream fact: feasts in ancient Egypt often centered on community and religion, with whole animals roasted, vats of beer poured, and piles of bread distributed in honor of the gods. During festivals, markets would swell with special treats that even the poorest could access, if only for the day. You pass a stall selling enormous flatbreads baked with sesame and brushed with honey, almost ceremonial in size, each one cut into wedges and handed out to eager hands. A quirky tidbit: roasted grasshoppers, crunchy and smoky, sometimes appeared as festival snacks, toasted in pans and salted generously. A boy offers you a handful from a woven basket. You hesitate, modern sensibilities kick in, but curiosity wins. The crunch is startling, like biting into a popcorn kernel with a nutty, smoky flavor that makes you reach for another. The boy grins, clearly delighted by your reaction. You notice musicians moving through the crowd, balancing lutes while nibbling fried chickpea cakes. Children dance in circles, their mouths stuffed with figs, hands sticky as they clap along. Families spread reed mats, laying out whatever treats they've gathered: honey fritters, beer, olives, and nuts. It's less a meal and more a moving picnic, laughter spilling over the edges of every blanket. Nearby, a troupe of acrobats flips through the air, pausing to snack on skewered meatballs between tricks. You catch one laughing mid-chew, nearly dropping his reed stick as he tumbles. The crowd roars with delight, and for a moment you realize even ancient festival performers had to sneak in bites between acts. Historians still argue whether certain foods were reserved exclusively for temple offerings during festivals, or if they flowed freely to the public as well. Some records suggest priests hoarded the choicest meats and honey cakes, while others point to evidence of grand public feasts. Watching the crowd here, you feel it must have been both. Sacred at the temple gates, but also joyous and shared among ordinary people. Vendors shout their wares above the music. One balances a tray of candied lotus seeds on his head, weaving through dancers. Another pours beer into small clay cups, spilling half of it as he's jostled by a laughing crowd. No one minds, the foam only adds to the festive mood. Children dart through the crowd, clutching tiny reed cones filled with nuts or sesame candy. A little girl trips and spills hers, only to have her older brother scoop up half and hand it back. A rare gesture of sibling kindness in any era. Their mother shakes her head but smiles, passing them both a piece of sweetbread to quiet the bickering. The smells are dizzying. Roasted goose wafting in from one side, honey cakes steaming from another, beer froth spilling down your arm as you lift your cup. It feels overwhelming, but in a way that makes your body want to sway with the rhythm of drums and laughter. You take a seat on a reed mat beside strangers who immediately offer you a fig cake. It's crumbly, sweet, speckled with sesame and warm from the oven. The kindness feels as nourishing as the food itself, as if festivals give everyone permission to share what little they have. The night feels alive here, not just with sound, but with the sense of belonging. You wipe honey from your hands, smile at the strangers beside you. and let the music, the food, and the laughter wash over you. For a moment, you are part of their festival, feasting like one of them. The music of the festival still hums in your ears when you wander toward a quieter corner of the market. Here the crowd thins and the stalls look different, neater, more refined, with wares laid out on linen cloths instead of rough reed mats. You realize you've strayed into the orbit of wealthier buyers, nobles or scribes, with coin enough to afford luxuries beyond the reach of most. Mainstream fact: the upper classes of ancient Egypt enjoyed more elaborate foods, including cuts of beef, delicacies like honey cakes, and imported goods such as wine from the Levant. One stall glitters with amphorae of dark red wine sealed with wax. The merchant pours a taste into a polished cup, the liquid thick, rich, and completely unlike the beer you've been gulping. Nobles sip it slowly, savoring each drop while commoners look on with envy. A quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that wealthy Egyptians had access to exotic imports like pistachios, cinnamon, and even coconuts carried across trade routes. One table displays tiny bowls of unfamiliar spices, their aromas sharp and mysterious. You lean closer, inhaling hints of resin and sweetness, the kind of scents that make ordinary bread taste like magic. Servants bustle around with trays of delicacies. You catch sight of roasted pigeons stuffed with dates and herbs, their golden skin gleaming in lamplight. A noblewoman nibbles daintily at one, barely making a dent, before passing the rest to her attendant. The attendant, eyes darting, sneaks a larger bite as he carries it away. Historians still argue whether the dietary gap between classes was as stark as some records suggest. Excavations of village sites show goose bones and honey residues even in modest homes, hinting that common people occasionally enjoyed luxuries. Yet watching the nobles here sip imported wine while the poor outside guzzle thick beer, the contrast feels undeniable. You notice trays of sweetmeats shaped into animals, lions, cats, even tiny crocodiles, crafted from honey and flour sprinkled with seeds for eyes. Children of the wealthy laugh as they break off pieces, eating sugar statues of the same creatures they worship in temple carvings. There's a sense of play in these foods, as if sweets became toys as much as treats. A nobleman gestures to a servant carrying a basket of dried figs, ordering them mixed into wine. You watch as the figs swell, softening in the liquid, releasing their sweetness into the cup. He sips, sighs with satisfaction, then dismisses a servant with barely a glance. The indulgence feels casual, as though sweetness itself were a privilege. Nearby, a jeweler merchant brags about his stall of candied almonds, imported at great cost. He lets you sample one, its sugary crust crunching like modern candy coating. It's delicious, though you wonder if the price could feed a family for days. The noble's corner is quieter than the festival chaos, but not somber, more like restrained enjoyment, marked by murmured laughter and the clink of delicate cups. Where the common stalls shouted and spilled here, every gesture feels deliberate, measured like a performance of refinement. Still, indulgence has its humor. You overhear a scribe complaining about his waistline, groaning as he rubs his belly. His friend laughs and says, "Blame the honey, not the gods," while they both reach for another pastry. Some excuses never change. The lanterns glow softer here, illuminating trays of delicacies, amphorae of wine, and the gleam of polished bronze utensils. You realize you're watching not just food consumption, but social theater. Junk food exists here too. It's just dressed in silk instead of reed. You step away, your mouth coated in sugar and wine, and your mind turning over the contrasts. Whether in raucous festival crowds or refined noble circles, the pull is the same. Indulgence, comfort, a bite of something unnecessary, but irresistible. Luxury looks different, but craving is universal. The market begins to quiet as dusk deepens, but your curiosity carries you farther into the alleys where smaller stalls cluster together. These are not the grand vendors with amphorae of wine or trays of roasted geese. Instead, you find the true definition of junk food, Little nibbles, salty bites, quick treats for people too impatient to wait for a meal. Mainstream fact: Egyptians loved fish in many forms, including dried, salted, or fermented varieties that could be eaten on the go. One stall is stacked with strips of dried fish, curled and leathery, their smell sharp enough to sting your nose. A vendor fans them to keep flies away, then offers you a piece. The texture is chewy, salty, and oddly addictive, like an ancient version of beef jerky, only fishier, and with the strong aftertaste of the Nile itself. A quirky tidbit: some sources suggest that Egyptians occasionally munched on lotus seeds popped like kernels, similar to popcorn. You imagine yourself grabbing a handful, the puffed seeds light and crackly, perfect for snacking while gossiping by the riverbank. If this is true, it means ancient Egyptians may have invented the movie night vibe thousands of years early, though without the movie unless you count staring at hieroglyphs. A group of children passes with baskets of roasted chickpeas. They crunch loudly, tossing them into their mouths like modern kids with peanuts at a baseball game. Their laughter fills the air, proof that even in a world of gods and pharaohs, kids just wanted a noisy snack. Historians still argue whether some of these smaller foods were staples or luxuries. Was roasted chickpea street food, or was it too expensive for daily munching? Excavations reveal chickpeas in both rich and poor households, but the debate lingers over whether it was junk food or everyday fuel. Another stall boasts flat cakes made from dates and nuts, pressed together until sticky. The vendor chops them into squares, wrapping them in papyrus to prevent your fingers from welding together. You bite into one and nearly lose a tooth, the sweetness intense, the crunch startling, like a mix between candy and granola bar. You can almost imagine it being advertised as energy bites in a modern health store. The salty-sweet balance of the market amazes you. On one side, a man sells pickled radishes that bite your tongue like vinegar lightning. On the other, a woman balances trays of honey-drenched figs that melt like syrup. People drift between, balancing sour against sweet, as though inventing the concept of flavor pairing long before culinary schools. Someone hands you a skewer of roasted quail eggs. You pop one in your mouth, the yolk rich and creamy. Nearby, another vendor hawks fried locusts coated in honey. You hesitate, but try one anyway. The crunch is memorable, like biting into a sugared chip that stares back at you. You laugh at yourself, but the taste isn't bad, kind of like kettle corn with wings. The crowd here is more relaxed than at the noble stalls, with chatter and bargaining filling the air. Food is not just sustenance, it's entertainment. People walk, chew, gossip, laugh, and swap bites. The smell of frying, fermenting, and roasting weaves into one long, fragrant lullaby. You notice that many of these junk foods are portable, wrapped in leaves, stacked in jars, or carried in baskets. They're snacks meant for wandering, evidence that human beings always needed food they could eat while multitasking. Some things never change. A boy sneaks a handful of sweet cakes, dodging between adults before vanishing into the crowd. His mother shouts after him, but he's already gone, munching with crumbs trailing behind him. You can't help but chuckle. Ancient Egypt had its snack thieves too. The deeper you wander, the more you realize that these stalls show the heartbeat of daily life. Nobles might dine on exotic imports, but the real joy of junk food comes from these alley vendors, their quick bites, noisy crunches, and sticky fingers. Food as pleasure, food as fun. And as you wipe honey from your hands, you realize the Nile may have changed its course many times, but the human craving for snacks never did. The air grows cooler as night drapes itself across the market, but the glow of torches keeps the food stalls alive. You follow the flickering light toward a wider courtyard where musicians play flutes and drums, their rhythms mingling with the sounds of chewing and chatter. This is where food transforms from simple nourishment into performance. Banquets, feasts, and late-night indulgences. Mainstream fact: feasting was a significant part of Egyptian culture, especially during religious festivals and elite gatherings. Archaeological records show long banquet tables covered in bread, meat, fruits, and jars of beer or wine. Tonight you find yourself drifting into the orbit of one such feast, where wealthy families recline on low couches while servants ferry trays of delicacies. One servant carries bowls of honey cakes shaped like lotus blossoms. Another brings out roasted ducks lacquered in a glaze of dates and herbs, their skin glistening under torchlight. A platter of beef ribs follows, sprinkled with coriander and garlic, filling the air with an aroma that makes your stomach rumble despite everything you've already eaten. A quirky tidbit, banquets sometimes included entertainment in the form of professional party guests called comical dwarfs or dancing girls, who kept the mood lively. Tonight you watch as jugglers toss fruit, some of which inevitably drops, only to be scooped up by eager children. It's like dinner theater, except instead of juggling fire, they're tossing figs and onions. Historians still argue whether all feasts were as decadent as tomb paintings suggest. Some believe the imagery exaggerated abundance to please the gods, while others point to actual remnants of animal bones and amphorae that confirm large-scale indulgence. As you watch bowls of pomegranates and baskets of figs appear endlessly from the back, you lean toward believing the evidence of your nose and stomach. At one side of the feast, a group of men raise cups of wine in a toast, their cheeks flush red, their voices louder with each round. It's clear that drunkenness wasn't frowned upon here. It was practically encouraged. Someone shouts a hymn to Hathor, goddess of joy, while another insists on singing badly to the rhythm of the drum. You suppress a smile. Karaoke has ancient roots, it seems. Closer to you, a servant pours honey over a dish of fresh cheese curds, creating a dessert that glistens like liquid gold. Guests dip bread into it, pulling sticky strands across the table. It looks messy, delicious, and exactly the kind of indulgence you'd regret in the morning. Another table boasts bowls of lentil stew, sprinkled with onions and leeks. The combination is humble compared to roasted duck, but you notice people devouring it happily. Even at fancy feasts, comfort food had its place. In the corner, children wrestle over skewers of candied fruit. Their laughter mixes with the musician's rhythm, a reminder that no feast is complete without a touch of chaos. One little boy steals his sister's pomegranate seeds only to be scolded while he tries, unsuccessfully, to hide red juice dripping down his chin. Your eyes wander to the decorations, garlands of flowers, lotus blossoms floating in jars of water, and torches smoking with resin. The setting feels both sacred and playful, as though the gods themselves were invited but also expected to laugh. You realize that food here isn't just about eating, it's about display, about demonstrating wealth, about creating a shared memory. The nobles might remember the dancing girls or the duck glazed in dates, while the servants will remember sneaking bites in the kitchen. Everyone gets a story. As the night wears on, the feast grows noisier. Cups clink, songs rise, and laughter ripples through the courtyard. You find yourself reclining, too, not as a noble, but as an observer, lulled by the rhythm of eating, drinking, and merriment. There's a warmth to it, a timelessness. Whether in torchlit Egypt or a modern family barbecue, the essence is the same. Too much food, too much laughter, and at least one person insisting they shouldn't have had that last bite. And as you drift in the haze of roasted meat and honeyed wine, you can't help but feel that junk food, no matter the century, always tastes better when shared at night with music in the background. The feast lingers in your senses, but as the torches burn lower and the Nile breeze cools your skin, the rhythm of the night begins to change. The music softens, the chatter fades, and even the smell of roasting meat grows faint as fires die down. It is in these late hours, when most bellies are full and most cups are drained, that you finally slow your wandering. You sink into the atmosphere of quiet abundance that drapes itself across the ancient city like a blanket. Mainstream fact: Egyptian society considered balance ma'at to be central to life. Eating too much, drinking too deeply, or indulging too often was often cautioned against in wisdom texts. You remember this as you notice a scribe, tipsy and slumped against a column, muttering about his aching stomach. He waves away more wine and promises his friends he will live more modestly tomorrow, though you doubt he will. A quirky tidbit. Some households are thought to have made simple sleep-time snacks like warm beer mixed with herbs as a way of settling down for the night. Imagine sipping that instead of chamomile tea, frothy, grainy, and probably doing the opposite of lulling you to sleep. Still, it shows that even thousands of years ago, people sought comfort in late-night nibbles. Historians still argue whether daily life really matched the lavish scenes painted in tombs. Were these depictions aspirational, an ideal world the dead hoped to carry with them, or reflections of meals truly enjoyed in life? As you lie back, half asleep under the glow of oil lamps, you decide it hardly matters whether real or symbolic. The abundance was imagined with care, and imagination is sometimes more nourishing than bread itself. Around you, servants gather scraps, sweep floors, and douse flames. Children who earlier squealed over candied fruits now sleep curled against their mothers' laps. Dogs gnaw happily on discarded bones. The leftovers of the night's junk food, honey smears, fish bones, chickpea husks, become tomorrow's memories, swept into the endless tide of life along the Nile. You wander back toward the riverbank, the sound of water gentle against stone. The air smells of damp reeds, earth cooling after the heat of day. Stars shimmer above you, sharp against the dark sky, the same constellations Egyptians mapped and named thousands of years ago. Their steady glow feels like a reminder. Indulgence passes, but the cycle continues. Your body feels heavier, not just from the feasting, but from the weight of history pressing softly around you. Each snack, each sweet, each crumb of bread is a thread in a tapestry, stretching across time. You've walked through alleys of vendors, stood among nobles sipping wine, and leaned close to the river's breath. Now at last, you let yourself settle into the quiet. The world of ancient junk food, with all its sticky fingers and crunchy bites, dissolves into something gentler. You picture trays of honey cakes drifting into mist, amphorae of beer becoming soft shadows, skewers of roasted fish melting into silence. Even laughter fades to a distant hum like a lullaby carried on the Nile wind. The river seems to whisper with you, its voice low and steady. You hear it say that humans have always chased small pleasures, whether in a salty bite or a sweet sip, and that seeking comfort is as timeless as the stars above. Your breath slows, your shoulders sink, and the images blur. The feast, the markets, the torches, the flavors, all fold into the hush of the night. The story softens until only the rhythm of your own breathing remains. And in this quiet, you drift.